This morning, early, I sat down and I wrote something in order to get it approximately clear in my own mind. And this piece, which I want to read quickly, is about the importance of the view and attitudes that we hold in the practice of the Vajrayana. So moving from our practice of calm abiding, we have a fairly narrow concern in the practice of calm abiding to develop the ability, the skill, if you will, to rest the mind peacefully, relaxed, and as much as possible without distraction. When we move into the practice of Chenrezig and the Vajrayana in general, we are embarking upon something significantly larger. And so the view, which normally we could say would be, for most of us, outside of the context of this practice, would be a person's beliefs, their history, their personal relationships and likes and dislikes. All of these things add up to most people's experience of the world, and their experience drives their actions. So the view in this case is the view which will be helpful in the practice of Chenrezig, and indeed, I think, safe to say, in all of our Dharma practice. So, we are all endowed with primordially awakened nature. So this is important to comprehend, that we have a mind, and that mind has a nature which we are mostly not aware of. But nonetheless, we experience it, of course. So we start with this: we are all endowed with primordial awakened nature. Nothing to add, yet something to recognize. That nature is already pure, primordially awakened, but we do not recognize it. And so, in a certain sense, we live in another world. We create and live. We create and live in the external world. We thoroughly create our relationships with both the external and the internal world. So far, so good, I think. Unfortunately, we usually do this blindly and then forget that we're the architects of our own experience. Perhaps this is not clear. Perhaps we imagine that others create our relationships with the world and the living things in it. It is naive to say that others create our relationships, since that also implies that they create our experiences. This is not only absurd, it is also a dangerous view. So I'm recalling a situation at a retreat with Kalu Rinpoche, where there was a man who was clearly mentally troubled, and he was concerned about certain people who hung around in places where he tended to be, and his experience was that those people controlled his mind. And so he was brave enough to pose that to Kalu Rinpoche and say, what can I do about this when other people are controlling my mind? And Kalu Rinpoche's response was, at that time, he said, for all my life, I think he was probably in his around 70 or more, for all my life I have meditated day and night in difficult circumstances in an effort to learn to control my own mind. I have been utterly unable to do so. He was not saying that he was somehow less able to do it than others, but rather than it's a hopeless endeavor. This is a rather profound statement. So if we believe that others are responsible for our experiences, we block ourselves from actually taking full responsibility for our own experiences. So he said, something like this: holding others responsible for your experiences undermines the value of our relationships with others. In order to fully harness the value and power of being a human being, we need to recognize our own experiences and fully acknowledge the role we have played in bringing those experiences to fruition. So I think as we begin the practice of Chenrezig, it's good to hold in mind as best as we can, though this is kind of an evolving thing for each one of us. In the beginning it's quite difficult, and as time goes on it becomes more obvious that it is a basis of sanity. As we move into the practice of Chenrezig, we are faced with holding a number of views which we may not be particularly facile or adept at holding. One of them is a deep appreciation of the lineages that bring us the teachings of the Dharma. And through that appreciation, other things then are possible. Connections with each other as Dharma practitioners, Dharma brothers and sisters in the Sangha, the small one and the large one too, so that our view continually expands, gets larger and larger. We have an appreciation that there are millions of people engaging in these practices day and night, at any time that you wake up or lie down and go to sleep, is a moment to recall our appreciation. So on page 1 of your text, there is a prayer. So let me just say this too. There's a prayer here which in many ways can feel, when you recite it, as not particularly meaningful. It's a list of names of lineage holders and it's common before engaging in the practice of Chenrezig to recite this list of names, which is very easy to put aside and decide, I don't know any of those people because they're all dead. I never got any teachings from them, so I'm not exactly sure why I'm reciting their name. But I think as we move through the practice of Chenrezig every other month, along with our practice of Shine, that we need to spend a little bit of time enriching the view that we hold, so that we can have the experience that we're meant to have and integrate that with the practices of calm abiding and, in this case, Chenrezig. Merely reciting the Chenrezig practice, many people have said, it is also my experience, that it just isn't worth much. You don't get much from it. And I know lots of people who can recite it from one end to other, literally syllable by syllable with perfection. Or we can also sing it, and it sounds beautiful. But our intention, let us not forget, is to bring ourselves to recognize the nature of mind itself. So in order to do that, we need to add some more things to it, not just the recitation of names, but a deeper understanding of why we would do that. And the why we would do it also includes the necessity to enrich our view of things. So the view here is kind of like a filter. I think of it like this. On a bright day, you put sunglasses on. And you're very clear when you put it on why you're putting those sunglasses on. So that you can drive your car without being blinded by the sun. Or maybe you just like the color of the sunglasses. Or maybe they're a fashion statement. It doesn't really matter. We put those filters on and the world changes around it. Is it not the case? The world changes color. People relate to us differently. They can't see our eyes and so on. So I'm not suggesting not wearing them. I'm just saying we need to know what it is that we're doing and where our experience is coming from and where it rests today. So in the Vajrayana, we do this all the time. We put on filters. And it's important to know what it is that we're doing. In this case, the prayer to the Lamas of the Mahamudra lineage, the filter, one of the many filters, is devotion. And most of us might say, I don't know these people. How can I possibly have a relationship with them, let alone a relationship of devotion. Totally comprehensible, fully understandable. And if you can't do it, it's okay. You can kind of sing along, which on any given day might be the best we can do, and it might be not bad. But it is not blocking the sun from our eyes. So devotion here is not only appropriate, but essential, to have a sense that without these people, we would have no Dharma practice. These people lived their life in order to benefit others, and as a result, by their brilliance and their realization, we have a Dharma practice. Then the problem is that it's behind a locked door. We can't quite get to it. We need to unlock it. And that devotion, that appreciation, which is where it begins, unlocks that door. We need to have an appreciation. Even if we don't have it, we can fake it. Faking it actually is a good start. Partly, especially if you don't fool yourself. You know you're faking it. I know I'm faking it. It's okay. I'll do my best to fake it. Therefore, I will not be caught by it. I will not identify with it. All sorts of negative things won't occur because you know you're faking it. That way, when you stop faking it, you'll also know that. So this is a lot about awareness. We planted the seed of awareness in the practice of calm abiding. Now we need to nurture that seed, that awareness, and bring it forward. So it starts on page 1. An odd place to start, isn't it? And it goes through page 6. These are not all of the members of the lineage by any stretch. They're just a kind of the ones that we have at this point in time. It appears that over centuries, some names drop off and other names take their place, and it's not exactly a fixed set. But the purpose of it remains the same. So commonly we sing this list, partly because singing gives us an experience. If I read the name Talopa and I have no idea who Talopa is, I don't have very much experience. And the point is to have actually a powerful experience, if at all possible. And so when we sing it, we all know you sing, you have a more powerful experience. You don't actually need to know the individuals, though at some point you might decide to study that. You need to have a sense that somebody created these practices, who understood the practices and had the realization to create them, and we are now about to begin to practice those things as they have done, with the aspiration, of course, to attain the same realization. So page 1 through page 8. Can you lead us in this, Melinda? Great. Brave. It's in Tibetan, of course.
Marpa Kedrup orgen cheborgeno Semaranjum dorjekenu Gyawayum tun chemborgenu Zamling chuki drapakenu Tokten katu wangpojenu Chedeshin shekpakenu Chetsuratna badrakenu Trukutong wadundengenu Kungen jamba zambojenu Sempajodundrugenu Yawachudra Yansukenu Ruchendra Sunme mikyu dorjekenu Gyawakunchok yenlajenu Jetsun wanchu dorjekenu Wanchuki wanchukenu Gyawachuyin dorjekenu Paden yeshenin bojenu Sungme yeshe dorjekenu Pachen chuki dundrugenu Yawang chanchu dorjekenu Situ chuki jonekenu Jetsun dodo dorjekenu Mi panchudru yansokenu Pemaninje wangpojenu Tekpachuki dorjekenu Gyalse odrutayekenu Kunsan kakya dorjekenu Pema wancho gyalpojenu Paden kense ozekenu Ramjun rikpe dorjekenu Rwang orbudundrugenu Yadagrang jungun gyate Chen Sawe Lama Cheno Yedang Kilko Latso Cheno Chukyon Magong Jandrel Keno Dakso Droduk Senchen Gula Tukse Yeshe Chenpoi Zikne Chak Chenelu Tokpa Zoji.
In the process of reciting the names, of course, we are meant to, through the view of appreciating the lineage holders and all of the teachings that we have received and will receive, we are meant to feel a growing relationship with the lineage, with the teachings, all of the aspects of it. So each time we do it, it's important, like if you're going to sing through that filter, sing through that view that you're holding. If you can't sing, you just recite it and still hold the view. Now on page 9 is the beginning of the refuge prayer. Again, just to bring it into focus, the meaning into focus, and the reason to engage in refuge should to be clear. When we look carefully at our confusion, our dissatisfaction with the myriad of things in this world that we have or don't have, the things we want but can't get, the things we want to get rid of but can't shake. Our confusion and suffering, it is taught and should be very clear that confusion and that dissatisfaction at all levels, from abject suffering to just irritating things, comes about by virtue of our identification with those things. The want itself, which promises relief, ends up betraying us time after time. If you look into the world, you can see that it's possible to go through one's entire life without ever recognizing the connection between the suffering and its cause. And therefore, in that situation, you cannot abandon the cause. You have to see the connection between the attachment to things, the inability to get them, the fear that you might not get it, the hope which becomes dashed because you didn't get it, and so on. Not seeing the relationship between those things and the suffering means that we just go through it over and over again. So the great news is it's totally, absolutely not necessary. We start by changing our refuge. Instead of refuge in where we live and how we live and whether or not the food is good or not so good, whether we need new clothing but can't afford it, and all the things that cause us consternation, those are our source of refuge. And by virtue of that, should be clear, we call it a false refuge because it does not relieve us of the confusion and the suffering. So on page 9, we begin by going for refuge in those things which actually will be an antidote to confusion and suffering. And that's by going for refuge to the Buddha. Could be the historical figure if that's your inclination. But let us not forget, preferably, that we are the Buddha, already endowed with the awakened mind, as the Buddha once said to a man who asked, "What's the difference between you and me?" And the Buddha said, "Nothing. We are both endowed with the awakened mind. The difference is, I recognize it, you do not." So the entire Dharma, the entire path, is about learning to recognize, coming to recognize that nature. And we call that intention, going for refuge. The reason I'm belaboring all of this, and I know that some of you are wondering, when will he shut up? I wonder that myself. It's because I also can sit down, open a text, and read it from one end to the other without ever engaging in the practice. It's amazing how disciplined we can become at useless things. When we have the full plate of food in front of us and we can't eat. So it's all by way of just saying, can we not, while we're sitting here together, remind ourselves that actually what we have in front of us is a profound path. The only thing left is to tread it. So, of course, as part of the path, not just because we're good citizens, though of course we are, we engage in the path in order to benefit both ourselves and others. And the truth that we discover is that the more that we focus on the benefit of others, the more we feel positive about ourselves, the more that we get for ourselves. That is so not clear, except on certain days when you see somebody who's really unhappy and you manage to do something that makes them smile, and you see that smile and you feel happy. So in that moment, we should actually recognize the relationship between these things. All we need to do is see it, and see it more often. Okay, let us look at this prayer for a moment. I'm going to read it quickly, and then we're going to recite it in Tibetan. From this moment until the heart of enlightenment is reached. See, it might be a long ways away before we reach the heart of enlightenment, but it's a joyful trip. I and all sentient beings equaling the limits of space, that is to say, there is absolutely no limit to the number of beings. It is not a large number. No number can define it. So I and all sentient beings, equal in the limits of space, we go for refuge to the glorious holy Lamas. We go for refuge to the Yidams. That's the deities like Chenrezig, in case you didn't know. The deities of the mandala. The mandala is groups of deities that share something in common. So they're put together in a mandala. We go for refuge. We go for refuge to the Buddhas, the transcendent conquerors. Note, these conquerors are not conquerors through a war on a battlefield. They are the transcendent conquerors. Transcendent meaning they conquered themselves, not that they conquered someone else. They are conquerors of their own desires, their own fears, their own hopeless hope. We go for refuge to the sacred Dharma. We go for refuge to the noble Sangha. We go for refuge to the assembly of Dakas, Dakinis, Dharma protectors, and guardians who possess the eye of intrinsic awareness. If that's not all clear, then you're on track. What we are building, what I said in the very beginning, and I will stick with it. We create and live in the external world. We thoroughly create our relationships with both the external world and internal world. Unfortunately, we usually do this blindly and then forget that we're the architects of our experience. The background teaching of these practices is that we continually create the world that we live in. It's not like it was done once and then we move in. It's like we're continually rearranging the furniture, repainting, removing, remodeling, everything being done and redone over and over again. Our dissatisfaction arises and we do something about it. Unfortunately, most of the time, not successful. When it isn't successful, we know who out there did it. Is it not so? So, you can write off, if you wish, we go for refuge to the assembly of Dakas. Let me just say that I'm not going to say what a Daka is this morning. Dakinis. Let's leave that one aside too. Dharma protectors, kind of beings who protect the Dharma, and guardians who possess the eye of intrinsic awareness. In other words, we are going for refuge in a plethora of beings that we may have no relationship at this time. But they all serve a function in the Dharma. And so we need to actually include them in some way in our practice and in our daily lives. So without having more information, which we will get over time, what we do is we embrace the Dharma itself. So this piece of it tells us that there's more than I can see. There's more than I can have an ordinary relationship with. And then we ask the question, is that all I want is an ordinary relationship? Maybe not. In which case, these other beings may provide the other part that we feel we don't have. But it doesn't just come by meeting someone at the door, shaking hands, having a hug or something. This one is going to require some work. But we put it there so that it's a reminder. And when you come to have some experience with them, then the text becomes more rich and the going for refuge becomes more rich. So for now, we'll work with what we have. So page 9 actually begins on the previous page. page 9. It's not the previous, page 9. Begins and it goes to page 11. And then there is another refuge prayer, which is a shorter prayer, and we will recite that one also. And because of time constraints, we will recite each one of these one time instead of the usual 3 this morning. Dandrowa Nyombe Semchen Tanche Dudine Zunte Jitsi Chubnim Boy Achike Baru Paden Lama Dampa Namla Kyabsuchyo Yedam Kilkorgi Latso Namla Kyabsuchyo Sanje Chomdende Namla Kyabsuchyo Chunam Lakyam Sucho Pabegandun Nam Lakyam Sucho Pavo Kandro Chukyon Someso Yesheki Chenrezig Sunday Rubayo. Now it gets interesting. Having turned our minds to refuge in the Buddha and all the teachings, the practices, and so on, we now continue to build upon this world, which may feel complex at first, but it won't be long before you have the sense that the external world that we have already built and our relationships with it, that is really complex. So for now, it's still pretty simple. And we now need to generate a visualization. The visualization itself can be a little bit challenging. So I'm going to also abbreviate that a little bit. The text begins on page 12. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the extra steps that we're going to not engage in this morning, Let us also say that not all of the steps are always essential. So it's not like a crime is being committed. Sometimes we do these practices rather quickly. The visualizations can be strung out and elaborated in a number of ways. They can also be generated in a kind of sudden way where we just snap the fingers and it's there. So if we listen to the description in its slightly abbreviated form, it says, on the crown of myself and sentient beings, pervasive as space, is a lotus and moon seat. So here we see, mostly clear, sentient beings pervasive as space means that we cannot count those sentient beings, especially since it doesn't just include human beings, it includes animals, insects, every kind of living being that might have a mind, that might have an inherent awakened mind. So on the crown of myself and sentient beings, pervasive as space, is a lotus and moon seat. So upon the head we imagine, depending on your tradition, let's say about a foot above the head or slightly less, a lotus in full blossom. And on that lotus there is a moon disk, which means a flat disk, which is the color of the full moon. And reading down to the next line in English, it says, from the Hri. You see where it says from the Hri. The Hri is a syllable in transliterated Sanskrit or Tibetan. And that Hri sits on the crown of that, your head on that moon seat. Hri is brilliant. So bright you cannot look at it, like trying to look at the sun directly. And from that Hri, suddenly Chenrezig appears. Chenrezig is clear, which is not to say like glass, but clear in the sense of translucent. He's white, radiating 5-colored light. We can say, just to name them, the 5-colored lights are red, blue, green, yellow, white. Down below on page 13 it says, smiling and gazing with compassionate eyes. Chenrezig. The first pair of his 4 hands, so he has 4 arms, the first pair of his 4 hands are joined together like this. The lower 2, since he has 4, the lower 2 hold a crystal mala or rosary. And a white lotus. Crystal mala and a white lotus. Adorned with jewels and silk, he wears a deerskin upper garment. So now you're keeping in mind that you are being challenged to build this environment as we move through it. First in a kind of summarized way, and later we'll do more. But it's important. Think whether you are engaging in the Dharma or whether you are at work in your job, you are continually building an environment and living in it. So it's not the case that this is weird. What's weird is that we don't recognize ourselves doing it. we engage in it and live in it, and generally speaking, hold others responsible for it. That's weird. This is just normal. We're just engaging in it from a different perspective. Turn the page, page 14. Did I miss something? No. His head ornament, that is Chenrezig's head ornament, is the Buddha Amitabha. Amitabha is red, a red Buddha. And Chenrezig sits. His two legs sit in the Vajra Asana, which is to say they're kind of crossed over each other, so what we sometimes call the lotus position. As best as you can visualize that is good. He is the embodiment and essence of all sources of refuge. So here we're talking about Chenrezig, in essence, being the Buddha, being the Sangha, being all of the sources of refuge. Chenrezig is also, we might add, an emanation from Amitabha. So now we'll go back to the beginning of this section, the generation phase on page 12, and we'll recite that together again up until page 14. Samchengi chitsu pekada weten Hrile pakcho Chenrezig selo zejun tuje chenji ze chazi Dambo tel jars Ogni shel train Bekar nam dardam Renjen jenji Ridak pape toyo so Kwak me be Shamne dorje kiltrung shudri me gawagyabden Yame kondo no Now we're going to do just this short piece here to finish, and then we'll take a break. You're meant, of course, to hold the pieces of this in your mind while you recite it. In other words, not like when we were 5 years old and putting together a small house and it fell down more often than it stayed up. We're meant to hold this up. Actually move in to this place in our minds and function from there. However, let us assume something even more interesting, that we go through this recitation and we become quite good at it. And on one occasion, that would be this very occasion, we finish. And we realize that during that time, Chenrezig actually appeared on the crown of our heads. And we had the experience of Chenrezig on the crown of our heads, radiating light in all directions and surrounded by all sentient beings, extending to the very limits of space itself. In that speechless moment, we might do something like have the wish that we might do something that is appropriate. And so here we have the appropriate response every time we engage in the practice, which is to recite an homage to Chenrezig. And let us not forget again that we are each Chenrezig. Nothing to add, only to be recognized as it is. So that when we pay homage to Chenrezig, it is not that we are paying homage to some external great figure far away. We are paying homage to our own awakened nature, trying to ripen ourselves to the extent of being able to witness it, to experience it. So now, just this one page, we'll recite this together. On the break, of course, silence is important now, and also during the break, in general, whether we're engaging in the practice of Chenrezig or not, or just walking around, try to recall the image of Chenrezig on the crown of your own head. From time to time, begin to get used to putting that building block in place. So now we'll take a break again for 10 minutes or 15, whatever it takes before the restrooms are finished.